Episode 22. Why you repeat the same mistakes. Have you ever promised yourself that this time would be different? This time you would choose differently, act differently, think differently. This time you would avoid the mistake. Yet somehow, months or years later, you find yourself standing in a familiar situation, facing a familiar problem, feeling a familiar disappointment. The faces may be different. The circumstances may have changed. The details may look new, yet the pattern feels strangely familiar. It is as if life keeps repeating the same lesson. And again. Many people experience this phenomenon. They enter similar relationships, make similar decisions, create similar conflicts, encounter similar failures, and eventually they begin asking an important question. Why does this keep happening? Why do people repeat the same mistakes? The obvious answer is lack of intelligence, lack of discipline. But Sigmund Freud believed something deeper was happening. He noticed that many individuals repeatedly recreated situations that caused them pain, not once, not twice, but throughout their lives. The pattern was so common that Freud developed a concept to explain it. He called it repetition compulsion, the tendency to unconsciously repeat unresolved emotional experiences. At first glance, this makes little sense. Why would anyone repeat painful situations? Why would anyone recreate suffering? Why would anyone return to experiences that cause distress? Freud's answer was surprising. The unconscious mind seeks resolution, even when it chooses unhealthy methods to achieve it. Imagine a person who grew up feeling ignored. As an adult, they repeatedly become attracted to emotionally unavailable partners. Each relationship creates disappointment. Each relationship creates loneliness. Each relationship reinforces the same wound. Yet the pattern continues, because the unconscious is drawn toward familiarity, not necessarily happiness. Familiarity. The emotional environment feels known, recognizable, comfortable, in a strange way, even when it creates suffering. This is one of the most important truths in psychology. Human beings often prefer familiar pain over unfamiliar uncertainty. A person may remain in a destructive relationship because it feels familiar, remain trapped in unhealthy habits because they feel familiar, remain loyal to limiting beliefs because they feel familiar. The mind chooses what it knows, even when what it knows is harmful. This explains why change can feel so difficult. Change does not simply require new behavior. It requires leaving behind psychological familiarity. And familiarity creates powerful emotional attachment. Many people believe they are choosing freely, yet unconscious patterns are quietly guiding decisions. The person repeatedly chooses the same type of partner, the same type of job, the same type of conflict, the same type of self-sabotage, not because they consciously want suffering, but because unresolved experiences continue influencing behavior. Carl Jung observed similar patterns. Although his explanation differed from Freud's, Jung believed unresolved aspects of the psyche continually seek attention. Ignored fears return. Suppressed emotions return. Unlearned lessons return. Life presents the same challenge in different forms until awareness develops. This is why some people seem trapped inside repeating cycles. Different locations, different people, different years, yet remarkably similar outcomes. The external details change. The psychological pattern remains. Consider someone who constantly fears rejection. Every social interaction becomes filtered through that fear. Every disagreement feels threatening. Every criticism feels devastating. Without realizing it, the individual behaves defensively. They avoid vulnerability, avoid honesty, avoid risk. Then relationships suffer. The fear of rejection contributes to the very outcome they were trying to prevent. The pattern repeats, and because the unconscious influence remains hidden, the person blames circumstances rather than the pattern. This is how repetition survives, unconsciously, silently, year after year. Many people attempt to solve recurring problems by changing external conditions. They move to a new city, start a new relationship, find a new job, change environments. Sometimes these changes help, but often the deeper issue remains untouched, because the pattern lives within the person, not the environment. The environment changes. The unconscious script continues. Imagine reading the same play on different stages. The scenery changes. The actors change. The script remains identical. This is what many psychological patterns look like. Different circumstances, same underlying story. One reason mistakes repeat is that the brain values efficiency. Habits conserve energy. Automatic responses conserve energy. The brain learns patterns and repeats them. This is useful when learning practical skills, walking, speaking, but it can also preserve unhealthy emotional habits. Defensive reactions become automatic. Avoidance becomes automatic. Self-criticism becomes automatic. The behavior no longer feels like a choice. Yet, it is not inevitable. It is learned, and what is learned can be changed. But change begins with awareness. This is where many people struggle. They focus on behavior while ignoring motivation. They ask, "How do I stop doing this?" instead of asking, "Why do I keep doing this?" The second question is often more important. Because behavior is usually a symptom, the deeper cause remains hidden. Why do I repeatedly choose this type of person? Why do I repeatedly avoid this opportunity? Why do I repeatedly react this way? Why does this situation affect me so strongly? These questions reveal patterns, and patterns reveal causes. There is another uncomfortable truth hidden inside repeated mistakes. Sometimes the behavior provides hidden rewards. A procrastinator avoids anxiety. A perfectionist avoids criticism. A people pleaser avoids rejection. A victim avoids responsibility. The behavior creates problems, but it also creates benefits. As long as those benefits remain unconscious, change becomes difficult. Part of the mind still believes the behavior is useful. This is why awareness matters. Awareness reveals both the cost and the reward. Only then can genuine change occur. Because genuine change requires honesty, not self-criticism, not self-hatred, honesty. The willingness to examine your own patterns without excuses, without blame, without denial. Many people ask, "How do I stop repeating the same mistakes?" A more powerful question may be, "What lesson am I refusing to learn?" That question changes everything, because repeated mistakes are often repeated lessons. Life keeps presenting the same challenge until understanding develops. Not because fate is punishing you, because growth requires awareness, and awareness often emerges through repetition. The pattern continues until the lesson becomes visible. Then something remarkable happens. The cycle begins losing power. The familiar reaction becomes visible. The automatic response becomes noticeable. The unconscious pattern becomes conscious. And the moment something becomes conscious, choice becomes possible. You are no longer trapped inside the pattern. You can see it. And once you can see it, you can begin changing it. Freud believed that bringing unconscious material into awareness weakens its influence. Jung believed consciousness transforms what remains hidden. Both reached a similar conclusion. The person who understands their pattern gains options. The person who sees their blind spot gains perspective. The person who understands their mistake gains power, not power over others, power over themselves. In the end, people repeat the same mistakes because the underlying lesson remains unconscious. The wound remains unresolved. The pattern remains invisible. But once awareness enters the picture, repetition begins to lose its grip, and what once felt like fate becomes something very different. And perhaps that is where real change finally begins.